He had money, power, and a city of skyscrapers bearing his name but not love, until one laugh and a Trader Joe's "I'll" changed everything. Ethan Whitmore had everything that money could buy: private jets, penthouse views over Chicago, skyscrapers stamped with his name. At 35, he was one of the wealthiest men in the Midwest. His empire stretched across luxury hotels, real estate developments, and international shipping lines. Business magazines called him the crown of Chicago. On paper, he should have been the man everyone admired, but Ethan carried a reputation he never asked for, the billionaire nobody wanted. Despite his immense wealth and generosity, the world rarely looked past his appearance. His broad frame filled every tailored suit he owned. His round face, thick features, and heavy step drew whispers wherever he went. People mistook his booming laugh for arrogance. His kind eyes went unnoticed because gossip preferred to focus on his chin, his waistline, and the way he moved. At lavish parties and glittering galas, he was never truly alone, but he was never truly seen. Investors gathered near him to secure contracts. So-called friends lingered for favors. Women smiled at him, but their smiles often carried calculation. When they stayed longer, it was not for his humor or kindness, it was for the keys to a new car, a diamond necklace, or the promise of a life cushioned by wealth. Ethan noticed. He always noticed behind his easy jokes and playful charm, loneliness followed him like a shadow. His staff adored him for his humor, his habit of making funny faces in board meetings, his ability to turn even the most tense negotiation into a moment of laughter. Yet when the crowds dispersed and the laughter faded, he returned to silence inside his glass-walled penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. The city sparkled beneath him, but Ethan felt detached from it all, like a king in a tower no one wanted to climb. Whispers trailed him everywhere. Will Ethan Whitmore ever get married? If he does, it'll be to someone chasing his fortune. He never let those words reach his lips, but they echoed in his chest. He carried them quietly, like stones in his pockets. Outwardly, he remained the man with quick jokes and easy laughter. Inwardly, he wondered if anyone would ever see him, not his wealth, not his size, but his heart, because Ethan Whitmore, despite the cruel nickname, was not a villain. He was not arrogant, not cold, not the spoiled air tabloids liked to paint. In truth, he was generous to a fault. He donated millions anonymously to hospitals and schools. He spent afternoons reading books to children at community centers without cameras present. He laughed easily and often because laughter was his armor. But at night, when the penthouse grew quiet, he admitted the truth to himself. All the wealth in the world had given him luxury, but not love. He dreamed of something simple, a woman who would laugh at his ridiculous jokes, who would see past the headlines and the body people mocked, who would stand beside him not because of what he could provide, but because of who he was. The city below sparkled with possibilities, but to Ethan it often felt like a desert where his heart wandered thirsty. Little did he know, fate had already begun to weave a different story for him. A story that would not be written in the golden halls of his hotels or the marble floors of his boardrooms, but in the most ordinary of places. Not in a ballroom, not at a gala, not in a private club filled with power brokers, but in the fluorescent aisles of a grocery store. It was there, among cereal boxes and grocery carts, that the billionaire nobody wanted would meet the woman who would change everything. It was an ordinary Thursday morning in Chicago, the kind of morning when commuters hurried down crowded sidewalks and the city buzzed with its usual rhythm. For Ethan Whitmore, however, the morning was far from ordinary. Instead of sending one of his assistants, he decided to run a simple errand himself: grocery shopping. Most billionaires rarely stepped inside a store, but Ethan enjoyed these moments. They grounded him. Inside a grocery aisle, he wasn't the empire-building billionaire. He was just a man with a cart, humming to himself while choosing cereal and fruit like everyone else. That morning, he pushed a silver cart into Trader Joe's on the north side of Chicago. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the bakery section. Ethan wandered through the aisles, tossing random items into his cart with little thought. Peanut butter. Sure, a bag of chips. Why not? He liked the feeling of being normal, of making choices that weren't tied to contracts or balance sheets. Then it happened. In the cereal aisle, where bright boxes lined the shelves like soldiers in colorful uniforms, Ethan reached for the very last box of Honey Crunch Delight. Just as his hand stretched out, another hand reached for it at the same time. Their fingers almost touched. Ethan blinked and glanced sideways. The hand was delicate, with neatly polished nails. Following the hand upward, he saw her, a woman who seemed completely out of place in the fluorescent glow of a grocery store. She had smooth, radiant brown skin that glowed under the lights. Her dark hair was styled neatly, framing a face both elegant and warm. She wore a simple but tasteful dress that spoke of confidence rather than extravagance. Her posture was straight, graceful, self-assured. For a heartbeat, Ethan forgot how to breathe. "Oh, please, take it," he said quickly, pulling his hand back with a polite smile. Ladies first. The woman shook her head with an amused smile. No, you should have it. It's the last one, and I can always pick something else. Ethan looked at the box again, then back at her. He felt a spark of mischief. Well then, he said dramatically, it seems fate wants us to battle for breakfast. She chuckled softly, a sound that stirred something deep inside him. But before she could answer, Ethan picked up the box and with exaggerated flair placed it back on the shelf. There, he declared, brushing off his hands like an actor. Finishing a scene. Now neither of us wins. For a second, the woman stared at him in surprise. Then she burst into a laughter, a full, genuine laugh that echoed down the aisle. Ethan's grin widened. He couldn't remember the last time someone laughed at his jokes without faking it. You're ridiculous, she said, shaking her head. Her laughter still bubbling. Guilty as charged, Ethan replied, raising both hands in mock surrender. But ridiculousness is underrated. Life's too short to be serious all the time. That was how their conversation began. They walked slowly down the aisles together, trading small remarks as they picked up items. Ethan exaggerated his struggles, reading ingredient labels, holding a jar of pasta sauce as if it were a treasure map. She laughed again when he lifted a watermelon and whispered, "Do you think this melon texts the cucumbers at night when the fridge light goes off?" Her laughter was free, rolling from her chest without hesitation. For Ethan, it was magic. She wasn't looking at him with calculation or pity. She was just enjoying the moment. By the time they reached the checkout lines, both carts were full. They paid separately, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt nervous. "Do you shop here often?" he asked carefully, trying to keep his voice casual. "Usually twice a week," she replied, adjusting the strap of her handbag. "Mondays and Thursdays." Ethan's heart leaped. He tried to hide his excitement beneath a casual smile. "Good to know. Maybe I'll see you around." She gave a polite nod, then walked toward the exit. That evening, Ava Johnson thought of the encounter only briefly. She didn't recognize him as Chicago's billionaire. To her, he was just a funny stranger in a grocery aisle. She smiled at the memory of his silly cereal stunt before moving on with her day. But for Ethan, her laughter replayed in his mind like a song on repeat. All evening through the quiet halls of his penthouse, he heard it, the sound of her laugh. For once, he hadn't needed to hide behind wealth or charm. He had simply been himself, and she had laughed. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The following Monday, Ethan returned to Trader Joe's. He wandered the cereal aisle, the bakery, the produce section. No sign of her. Disappointed, he drove home alone. But on Thursday, his luck changed. Near the fruit section, he saw her again, Ava Johnson, pushing her cart gracefully as if she belonged to another world entirely. Ethan forced himself to act casual, picking up an orange and holding it like a prized treasure. "Well, look who it is," he said with a grin. "Apparently, the universe thinks we should shop together." Ava laughed, shaking her head. "Or maybe you just really like this supermarket." "Guilty again," Ethan said, winking playfully. They continued through the aisles side by side, their conversation light and easy. When Ava teased him for being dramatic about choosing pasta shapes, he replied, "Every spaghetti strand has a destiny. We just can't break it." By the time they reached the checkout, the air between them felt different, lighter, familiar, full of promise. Ethan gathered his courage. "Would you mind exchanging contacts?" he asked, his voice steady but hopeful. Ava studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Sure." When they swapped numbers, Ethan felt as though fireworks were going off in his chest. That night, he texted her a simple message, "Made it home safe, though I think I left half my jokes in the store." Ava laughed when she read it and replied, "Don't worry. The staff will clean them up." For Ethan Whitmore, the billionaire nobody wanted, something extraordinary had just begun. From that Thursday forward, Ethan Whitmore found himself looking forward to grocery days in a way that no billionaire should. Monday mornings and Thursday afternoons became small markers of hope. He was a man with skyscrapers in his name, yet he checked his calendar not for board meetings or earnings calls, but for the chance to bump into Ava Johnson at Trader Joe's. Their second encounter had shifted something in him. She was different. Her laughter didn't feel rehearsed. Her smile didn't feel like an investment. For the first time in years, he wasn't being measured by the number of zeros in his bank account. He was simply Ethan, a man with silly jokes and a cart full of unnecessary snacks. Over the next few weeks, their meetings grew less accidental and more intentional. Sometimes he arrived early and pretended to debate between apples and oranges until she walked in. Sometimes she lingered a little longer in the pasta aisle, just to see if he would show up with another absurd theory about spaghetti destiny. Eventually, Ethan gathered the courage to text her outside their grocery encounters, "Made pasta tonight." It clumped together like it was plotting against me. Eva's reply came quickly, "You probably didn't add enough salt, or maybe the spaghetti strands knew their destiny and wanted to stick together." Ethan laughed out loud, alone in his penthouse. For once, the walls around him didn't feel so cold. Soon their texts stretched late into the night. They talked about everything: movies, childhood memories, the quirks of Chicago weather. Eva admitted she was terrified of deep dish pizza loyalty debates because she secretly preferred thin crust. Ethan confessed that despite owning a luxury car collection, he often drove an old Jeep because it made him feel normal. It wasn't long before texts weren't enough. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" Ethan finally asked one evening, his thumb hovering nervously over the send button before pressing it. Her reply, "Sure, as long as you don't bring clumpy pasta." Ethan grinned wider than he had in years. That weekend, they met at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Chicago Riverwalk. The city glittered beneath them, the skyline painting the horizon in steel and glass. Ethan, dressed in his finest tailored suit, felt more nervous than he had in any billion-dollar negotiation. When Ava arrived, the evening seemed to shift. She wore a simple navy dress, elegant without being flashy, her hair brushing softly against her shoulders. Ethan stood quickly, pulling out her chair with a smile that was both gentlemanly and shy. "Thank you," she said warmly, her eyes crinkling as she smiled. Dinner flowed with ease. Ethan leaned into humor as always, but this time he didn't need to force it. Ava laughed at his ridiculous stories, teased him when he exaggerated, and told her own tales of mishaps at work and clumsy childhood adventures. At one point, Ethan held up his steak knife dramatically. "You should know, I once tried to cook steak myself. I set off the smoke alarm and my staff nearly evacuated the building." Ava laughed so hard she covered her mouth, shaking her head. "I can't take you seriously." "Good," Ethan said, his grin wide, "because serious is overrated." For the first time in years, he felt free of judgment, free of whispers, free of being seen as nothing but a bank account with legs. Around Ava, he could just be Ethan. Their dinners became frequent. Sometimes they met in quiet restaurants to avoid the flashing cameras of society pages. Other times they chose lively diners where no one cared who Ethan Whitmore was. Eva encouraged him to stop hiding. "Why do you worry so much about people seeing us?" she asked once, teasing him over dessert. Ethan hesitated, tapping his spoon against the plate. "Because people don't always understand. They'll look at you, then look at me, and wonder what's wrong with you." Eva reached across the table, her hand gently covering his. "Let them look. I'm happy. That's what matters." Her words sank deep into him, dissolving insecurities that had clung for years. Yet even as their connection grew, Ethan couldn't ignore the whispers outside their bubble. Rumors began spreading in the business world and social circles. People noticed him with a beautiful woman by his side. They saw of his elegance, her confidence, her warmth, and they saw him, the man mocked for his size and appearance. "She'll leave him soon. Just wait. She's only there for the money. No woman like that would ever stay with him." The comment stung, though he tried not to let it show, but Eva was different. When he cautiously mentioned the rumors during one of their evening drives, she rolled her eyes. "People always talk," she said firmly. "They'll keep talking whether we're together or not. I'd rather laugh with you than waste my time worrying about gossip." Her voice was steady, her gaze warm, and in that moment Ethan knew she meant it. For Ethan Whitmore, the billionaire nobody wanted, something extraordinary was happening. What began as laughter in a Trader Joe's aisle was blossoming into something deeper, something that felt like hope. As Ethan and Ava's connection deepened, the city began to notice. Whispers spread through Chicago's high society, echoing across boardrooms, cocktail parties, and gossip columns. Some people stared when they walked into restaurants together. Others lowered their voices, but never low enough to escape Ethan's ears. "She's stunning. Well, it's only a matter of time before she takes what she wants and leaves. No woman like that would ever stay with him." The same old chorus Ethan had lived with 4 years returned, sharper than ever. Only this time it wasn't just about him, it was about Ava too. He carried the pain quietly, hiding it behind his usual humor. But late at night, when Ava wasn't there, the words pierced him. He wondered how long she could withstand the scrutiny, how long before she realized what the world saw when it looked at him. Ava, however, brushed it all off. One evening as they drove along Lakeshore Drive, the city lights shimmering against the water, Ethan finally mentioned the rumors. "They're saying things about us," he admitted, gripping the wheel tighter than he meant to. "Things I don't want you to hear." Ava tilted her head, her eyes calm. "Of course they're talking. People always talk. But I don't care, Ethan. I'd rather laugh with you than waste my time worrying about strangers who don't even know me." Her words soothed him more than she knew. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt someone was standing with him instead of against him. But not everyone was so accepting. At Ava's family home, tensions were growing. Her mother, Linda Johnson, had made her opinion crystal clear from the moment she heard Ethan's name. "You are too beautiful, too refined, too good for this," Linda insisted one evening, her voice sharp with disapproval. "A man like him will only drag you down." Mom Ava tried to interrupt, but Linda pressed on. "What will people say when they see you with him? You'll become a laughingstock. Do you understand? They'll mock you, Eva. You deserve better." Eva's father, Robert Johnson, sat quietly through the tirade, his brows furrowed. He wasn't as vocal as his wife, but his silence carried its own weight. Finally, Linda turned to him. Robert, you need to talk to him. Tell him to step away from our daughter before this goes any further. Warn him. Make it clear this relationship will not stand. Robert hesitated, but in the end he agreed. A few days later, Robert arranged to meet Ethan privately at his downtown office. Ethan greeted him warmly, offering a firm handshake and his trademark wide smile. Mr. Johnson, it's an honor, Eva speaks so highly of you, Ethan said sincerely. Robert nodded, rehearsing the speech his wife expected of him. He was supposed to warn Ethan away, to tell him he wasn't suitable, to demand he leave Eva alone. But when Ethan began to speak, the words Robert had prepared dissolved. Ethan didn't brag about his wealth or try to defend himself with status. Instead, he spoke with quiet honesty. He told Robert about how Ava's laughter had changed his world. How, for the first time in years, he felt like a man instead of a bank account. How Ava made him feel alive. I know what people say about me, Ethan admitted, his eyes soft. I know how I look. I've heard it all my life, but your daughter doesn't treat me like a joke. She treats me like a man, and all I want is to give her the same honesty she's given me. Robert sat silently, studying him. He had come ready to demand separation, but what he found instead was sincerity. Ethan Whitmore wasn't like the shallow men who had circled Ava before. He wasn't interested in her father's fortune or the family name. He was genuine. By the end of the meeting, Robert extended his hand again. You're a good man, Ethan. I see why she stays. When Robert returned home, Linda pounced immediately. Well, did you tell him? Robert shook his head slowly. No. I won't interfere. Let her be happy. Linda's lips pressed into a tight line, her disapproval unshaken, but Robert had seen enough. He trusted his daughter's choice. For Ethan, the meeting was a quiet turning point. Eva's father had looked into his heart and hadn't turned away. It was a rare taste of acceptance, and it meant more than any business deal he had ever closed. But outside their small circle of trust, the city's whispers only grew louder. Tabloids speculated, socialites gossiped, strangers sneered. And through it all, Ethan clung to the sound of Ava's laughter, the one thing strong enough to silence the world. The more time Ethan and Ava spent together, the more certain he became that she was different. She wasn't dazzled by his penthouse or the sleek cars in his garage. She didn't ask about his net worth or the details of his empire. What she wanted most from him was something no amount of money could buy: his humor, his honesty, his presence. One evening, over dinner at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the Chicago skyline, their conversation turned serious. The city lights twinkled below like scattered diamonds. Ethan had just finished making her laugh with a story about burning toast so badly his staff banned him from the kitchen when Ava suddenly grew thoughtful. Can I tell you something? She asked, her voice softer than usual. Ethan set down his fork. Of course, she sighed, tracing the rim of her glass with her fingertip. I've been through so many failed relationships. Do you know why? Ethan shook his head gently. Because every man I've dated saw me as an extension of my family's wealth, she said. Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. They looked at me and saw dollar signs. I was never enough on my own. It was always about what they could gain. Her eyes glistened as she admitted, I'm the only child. I'll inherit everything someday. And men, they tried to charm me, flatter me, but it always ended the same. They wanted my future, not me. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew the weight of being judged for the wrong reasons. He had lived with it his entire life. Ava looked at him then, her gaze steady. But you don't treat me like that. You don't want anything from me. You just make me laugh, and that means more to me than anything else. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of music drifting from the restaurant speakers. Finally, Ethan reached across the table and took her hand in his. His voice was low but firm. Ava, I don't need your wealth. I've got enough of my own to drown in. What I need is your smile. That's what I can't buy. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of relief. She squeezed his hand, her heart finally at ease. Something shifted that night. Their bond moved beyond laughter and dinners. It became trust, two people who had both been misjudged in different ways, finding peace in each other's honesty. From then on, their relationship grew stronger. They strolled through Millennium Park, laughing over silly street performers. They spent late nights on the phone talking about childhood stories and favorite movies. On weekends, they escaped the city, exploring small towns in Illinois where no one cared who Ethan was. Yes, the world still whispered. Yes, the tabloids still speculated. Yes, her mother still frowned. But together they learned to drown out the noise with the sound of their own laughter. One Sunday afternoon, while walking hand in hand along the Chicago Riverwalk, Ethan turned serious again. Sometimes I wonder how long you'll stay, he admitted quietly. Not because I doubt you, but because I know the world doesn't make it easy. Ava stopped and looked up at him. Ethan Whitmore, do you know what I hear when the world talks? What? Background noise, she said firmly. That's all it is, just noise, and I'm not going to let noise decide who I love. Her words wrapped around him like armor. For once, the whispers didn't sting as much. Still, the pressure from Ava's family hadn't disappeared. Linda Johnson remained firm in her disapproval, but Ava no longer allowed it to dictate her choices. I love him, Mom, she said one evening, her tone steady. I don't care what people think. I don't care what you think. I'm happy. Isn't that what matters? Linda shook her head, unable to understand, but Robert, sitting quietly nearby, finally spoke up. Linda, he said, his voice calm, but firm. She's right. She's happy. That's enough. Ava smiled at her father with gratitude. For the first time, she felt that the most important man in her family was standing on her side. Despite the resistance, Ethan and Ava refused to let doubt win. They leaned on each other, choosing to laugh when the world tried to tear them down. They created their own sanctuary of joy, of story that didn't just survive gossip but defied it. And with every laugh, every late-night call, every walk through the city, Ethan Whitmore came to believe something he had once thought impossible, that the billionaire nobody wanted had finally been chosen. By the time spring rolled around, it was no longer a matter of if Ethan and Ava would marry, it was only a matter of when. Their love had survived whispers, gossip, and family doubts. What began as laughter in a trader Joe's Isle had blossomed into a bond too strong to be broken. When the day finally came, Chicago shone beneath a golden sky. Guests from across the country and beyond arrived at the Grand Cathedral downtown, its stained glass windows glowing. With morning light, black cars lined the streets, carrying dignitaries, business magnates, and family dressed in their finest. Photographers swarmed outside, their cameras ready to capture the wedding the city had been buzzing about for months. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Ethan stood tall at the altar in a black tuxedo, his broad frame filling the space. With quiet strength, his heart pounded, but his smile was steady. He had never felt more certain of anything in his life. Then the music shifted. The cathedral doors opened. A hush fell over the room. Ava Johnson stepped inside, her white satin gown shimmering with lace detail, her veil catching the light like spun silver. She glided down the aisle with effortless grace, her beauty radiant, her smile unwavering. Gasps rippled through the crowd, not of mockery, but of Ethan's eyes brimmed with tears. She wasn't just stunning, she was his, and in her smile he saw everything he had ever longed for. When Ava reached him, she squeezed his hand, grounding him. The ceremony began, rich with tradition, but for Ethan and Ava, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. They exchanged vows with trembling voices, slipping rings onto each other's fingers. I promise to choose you every day, Ava whispered. I promise to protect your laughter like it's the most precious treasure I own, Ethan replied. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Ethan pulled Ava close and kissed her gently, his hand cupping her cheek. Applause erupted, echoing against the cathedral's high ceilings. They were no longer two people fighting whispers, they were one. The reception was held in a grand ballroom draped in gold and crystal. Tables overflowed with roses, candles flickered against polished silver, and a live orchestra filled the room with music. Guests stood to cheer as Ethan and Ava entered hand in hand. Their first dance was magical. Beneath a cascade of falling petals, Ethan guided Ava gracefully across the floor, surprising everyone with his ease. She laughed softly, her eyes never leaving his. Do you realize how many people are watching us right now? Ethan whispered playfully. Let them watch, Ava whispered back. We're writing our own story. Throughout the night, friends and family rose to speak. Ava's friends praised her loyalty and warmth. Ethan's colleagues spoke of his generosity and humor. Even Robert Johnson stood with a glass in hand, his voice thick with emotion. I once doubted this man, he admitted, but I see now why my daughter chose him. He makes her shine, and that's all a father could ever want. Applause thundered. Even Linda, though silent and unsmiling, could not deny the happiness radiating from her daughter's face. The celebration stretched late into the night with dancing, laughter, and music. Cameras flashed, capturing images that would grace magazines and social media feeds the next morning. But for Ethan and Ava, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the joy of knowing they had finally silenced the whispers with love. After the festivities, the newlyweds embarked on their honeymoon. They walked hand in hand along the Seine in Paris, shared sunsets in Santorini, and laughed under glowing lanterns in Kyoto. Everywhere they went, they carried their own bubble of joy, proof that love could be found in the most unexpected places. Back home in Chicago, their life together flourished. Ethan tried cooking again, often burning toast or oversalting pasta, and Ava laughed until her sides hurt before swooping in to save dinner. They hosted gatherings filled with warmth, their home echoing with music and laughter. When the world outside grew loud with gossip, they simply closed their doors and found peace in each other's arms. Years later, when people spoke of Ethan and Ava, they no longer mentioned his size or her beauty. They spoke of their laughter, of the way he looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world, of the way she stood by him despite everything. Their story spread, inspiring others. Headlines that once mocked now celebrated them as the couple who proved that love was stronger than appearances. And whenever Ethan was asked the secret of their bond, his answer never changed. It was never about how we looked. It was about how we laughed. Ava gave me joy, and I gave her honesty. That's love. That's all it ever needed to be. Ava would smile, slip her hand into his, and whisper, always. And indeed, it was always. Ethan Whitmore, the billionaire nobody wanted, had become the man everyone admired, not for his fortune but for the love that defined his life. Together, he and Ava proved that true happiness is not found in wealth or appearances, but in laughter, kindness, and love that chooses you every single day.